Hi there and welcome to today's webinar, Using Sponsored Webinars to Attract New Customers, hosted by Modern Casting, Metal Casting Design and Purchasing, and WebAttract, the leaders in thought leadership webinars. I'm Lori Dearman, Senior Webinar Producer with WebAttract, and I'll be your moderator and one of your hosts for today's session. In just a moment, I'll be introducing our featured speakers, Jim Beckwith and Mike Agron, who will be sharing what they hope you'll get out of today. But first, let me tell you a bit about our audience. We've invited you, along with other metal casting professionals, suppliers, and advertising agencies. Regardless of your industry media type or your location, we're confident you'll find today's webinar of value as we've carefully selected examples that apply to each of these media types. Now, I'm sure most of you on this webinar are familiar with Jim Beckwith, but for those of you who are not, Jim is a media consultant extraordinaire and is with today's sponsor, the American Foundry Society, publishers of Modern Casting and Metal Casting Design and Purchasing. He's a passionate advocate for his clients and the industry, and we are delighted to welcome him to the webinar today. Jim, how are you doing out there in Chicago?
Doing great, doing great. Thanks, Lori.
Now, Jim, can you get us started by saying a few words about today and what you hope folks will get out of the webinar today?
Yeah, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Modern Casting. Most everybody in our industry is. It's the industry's premier publication, but not everybody is familiar with Metal Casting Design and Purchasing. We've developed that product about 15 years ago on request from industry leaders as a means for the metal casters to reach out to end users, buyers, and designers. So we have two publications that serve completely different audiences, but many of the ad programs we've developed are equally appropriate to both audiences. This is why we've invited folks from both sides of the coin to today's webinar, as the webinar program is one of those programs. We've offered sponsored webinars as a lead generation tool for both suppliers and metal casters for about 5 years. During that time, we haven't put on all that many in terms of raw numbers, but the ones we have done have been very successful for our partner companies. So I'll be showing you some sample content from previous webinar that we put on in recent years. Again, I'm fully aware that that people are coming into this from two different angles. Some of you are looking to market to foundries, while others of you are looking to market to end users of castings. This particular program can work equally well for both groups. So what I'm hoping you'll get out of today's program is a clear idea on the ways a sponsored webinar can assist with your sales and marketing efforts. It's not an easy thing to implement, but I'm hoping you'll walk away from the presentation with the impression that it's well worth the time and energy that you put into it. And also, you'll get the takeaway of the book as well, which Mike will talk a little bit more about later. So let's take a look at a poll, Lori, and see what we can learn.
Absolutely, and folks, coming up on your screen is that poll, and we'd like to hear from you. What is your current pipeline status? And if you wouldn't mind just selecting one here, is it too many leads, not enough qualified leads, just the right amount of leads, or maybe there's some other issues? All right, looks like 0 on the too many leads, 64% saying not enough qualified leads, 9% of us saying just the right amount of leads, and 27% having other issues. Jim, any thoughts here on these results?
Yeah, I'm not surprised to see this. I mean, obviously, if you're interested in webinars as an option, then it probably means you're looking to either put some more leads into your pipeline, or perhaps you're coming at it from a different angle. So can't say I'm surprised at all, but I hope we can help everybody out with what they're looking for today. All
right. Thanks so much. Okay, at this point, I'd like to bring on our featured speaker for today, Mike Agron, and he's a webinar demand generation expert and award-winning author of Webinar Ready, a step-by-step guide to hosting successful webinars. Now, note that there's a free copy of the ebook, which is our playbook for doing webinars, and it will be made available to each of you after the webinar today. You can opt in to receive this at the end of the webinar today via poll, so stay tuned for that. Mike is also the co-founder and executive webinar producer for WebAttract. He's moderated and produced literally hundreds of webinars for global and emerging brands, where his approach is to uncover something unique that will make money for his sponsors while delighting his audiences. Mike coincidentally also resides in Sacramento, so welcome to the webinar, and Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. How are you doing there, Mike?
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Jim, and folks, thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to us because we eat, sleep, and breathe webinars 24/7, and we just love to be able to share about the value of webinars and how you can use them to help you grow your business, particularly in 2014. As Lori said, a lot of what I'm going to be saying is covered in our book, which is free, and highly urge you, if you're going to be doing webinars, to download it, and we'll give you information on the end. Well, let's get started because we have quite a bit to cover today. And as we promised in the invitation, I want to cover 3 or 4 important topics. The first is, why do webinars seem to rank and continue to rank as a top marketing tactic? I'm going to talk about that. Why do they work? And also, how do webinars impact the buyer's decision along the journey? As we all know, there's lots of toll gates that a buyer goes through. We'll talk about that. And then we're going to go back to Jim, and Jim's going to give a webinar success story of a metal casting partner. Then I'm going to wrap up and give you our best practices and our top 10 webinar blunders to avoid at all costs. And then Jim and I will come back and say a little bit about the sponsored webinar program. So as Lori said, please ask questions as often and as many times as you'd like. We'd love to hear what's on your mind, and we're going to do everything we can to answer them at the end of the webinar, the formal presentation. When I was putting together today's webinar, I was thinking about what are some of the biggest myths that people have about webinars, because they are very powerful. But there's 3 things I want you to keep in mind. And the first big myth is, some people think build it and they will come from the field of dreams. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is a very deliberate methodology and approach that we'll show you, and it takes a lot of thought to be able to get your message out. Also, some people have the notion that, hey, you know, I'm a great presenter. I'll just show up and wing it. I don't have to rehearse. One of the things about a webinar is, because it's virtual, and yes, it's live to everybody here, we can't see one another. So we do not have the visual cues and the body language to know how well we're engaging. It takes a certain amount of practice because our main instrument for connecting with the audience is our voice and how we communicate. And the other myth that a lot of people have is that all attendees to a webinar are sales ready and they want to buy now. We'll show you why that's not always the case, but it's a great opportunity to get them sales ready. So let's talk about why webinars rank as a top marketing tactic. Webinar demand generation, as we call it, is made up of 3 parts. The first part is to be able to target and attract an audience that would get value in something you have to present to them, something to educate them or make them more intelligent. The second challenge is, once the audience becomes part of the webinar, how do you engage them? How do you get them inspired to want to learn more? Because that's the whole objective of the webinar. The objective of the webinar is not a full training. It's to get people interested enough so they'll want to have a conversation with you after the webinar. And the third challenge, the third part, is being able to convert prospects into customers. And we're going to go through some examples on all of these and talk about these challenges. And this is why webinars can become very effective. But in order for them to become effective, I call webinars that are really effective supercharged. They have to do 2 things. If you look at the y-axis, it shows commercial outcomes. If you look at the axis, it shows the value to your audience. And what's important here is that you are always focused on your commercial outcomes. And that could be raising your brand awareness, could be promoting your thought leadership, it could be getting more leads, it could be getting more proposals. Whatever those are, they have to be defined up front. But you also have to bring value to your audience. What's in it for them? Why will someone, like everybody here, invest their time and opt to spend time with us? Those are the 2 things that constantly have to be balanced. Now, when it comes to attracting an audience, here's probably the biggest revelation and the biggest change we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years, particularly with the internet. An organization called Serious Decisions, which specializes in demand generation, did a survey. They found that today 70% of B2B buyers prefer to do their research online before they want to speak to a live salesperson. Think about that. It's a completely different model than many of us grew up with. So people who come to a webinar are in various phases, and I'm going to show you some of those phases in just a moment. But what this means is they might be mildly curious, or they might be ready to shortlist 3 vendors. They might be ready to do business with you. This is an opportunity, but they like the anonymity of being able to be online. And the analogy that I use is with when I show that retail store on the right. It's no different than when you go into a retail store and you're just researching, you're just looking to see what's there. You're curious. The last thing you want, the last thing I want, is some energetic, enthusiastic retail sales clerk coming up to me and saying, "Hi, may I help you?" And really, no thanks, I'm just looking. So that has to be factored into your planning of a webinar, where your audience is at. Now, one of the other big changes is this shift from traditional marketing to content marketing. Let's talk about that for a second, because content marketing is about providing information and education rather than traditional marketing, which is more of a sales pitch. So if you look at the chart I have up here, on the left-hand side, we talk about informational. Informational is providing business outcomes and results in the form of a case study, which Jim is going to do in a little bit. It's talking about best practices, lessons learned, business value, metrics, return on investment, as opposed to traditional marketing, which is more pitchy, and it becomes about the product. It becomes about features and benefits and pricing. We seldom ever bring this up in a content marketing webinar, because first we need to inspire the audience to want to learn more. Once we have a conversation with them, then we can get into the features and benefits of our products and pricing. But first, let's show them the benefit of using this capability. And the Content Marketing Institute, if you're not familiar with them, is a wonderful organization that's all about helping marketeers learn how to educate and make their buyers more intelligent, with the objective of being able to drive a more profitable customer interaction. So again, it's about educating. It's giving information away with the expectation that if you educate somebody, they'll want to hear from you more. But the reason webinars are ripe for attracting prospects who want to become your customers is really illustrated by this graphic here. Folks who come to webinars are in one of 2 positions or states. If you look at the gentleman on the left, there's disruption in their business, their industry, their market, and that disruption is causing a level of pain. It's what keeps somebody up at night. They know they could have better outcomes, but they're not sure how. Or they're like the lady on the right. They're actively looking for a solution. So if you're going to do a webinar, you need to think about what are the disruptions that you're going to address, how is it going to provide better outcomes. Those are the 2 things that are very, very important. Now, what are some of the popular B2B webinar themes? There's probably 3 different themes that we find for demand gen webinars that really work. The first is a case study, and a case study focuses on business improvement. And in this case, this was a case study on how Parker Aerospace was able to take advantage of existing workstations to do more simulation. And there was a whole process behind this that was explained to the audience. The other is a how-to or a tutorial. That's the second one. This is very interesting because this is with an organization that wanted to talk about the business case for composites. And they were going to engineers and designers who use traditional legacy materials, such as castings, and they were trying to show them where composites could be another option. And the third is in the area of standards and compliance. There's no more interest when liabilities and impact on production take place than to teach people about standards and compliance. These are the 3 topic areas that are the most popular. But let's look at how webinars impact the buyer's decision process. So you've developed a message and a webinar around a particular topic. You've given them good, solid information. What I'm going to show you here is how that happens. because now is the opportunity when they attend the webinar to engage them. And here's really the fun part of a webinar. A webinar is really a time for storytelling. It's a time to be able to give people information and share with them your best practices, your lessons learned. And it's not about death by PowerPoint. And you'll see that later on. It's not about reading to them because they want to hear from you, or they could just pick up an email and read it. But the way to think of a webinar to make it effective and to really make it engaging, think of it like a radio show, but with pictures. And this is the way that these webinars work. They become a radio show, they become with pictures, and they're fast moving, and they're designed to keep the audience engaged. Now, the third part is after you've engaged your audience is how do you convert them? What I'm going to show you here is probably one of the most important examples of how you can convert somebody and what to do. And again, it's all based upon giving them information. And once you give them information, you can ask for something back. So during the registration process, one of the questions that sometimes we will ask for our sponsors or our clients is, do you recommend, specify, or influence the purchase of products or services? And as you can see by this graph, a high degree of the people registering for the webinar impact the decision-making process. Now that's important because we want to make sure we're targeting decision makers. So we ask them these questions, and then at the end of the webinar in a survey, we ask them, based upon what you learned today, how would this impact your decision going forward? Now we'll watch this. So what we wanted to know is, did the webinar move the intent to purchase? And so the question was, having attended today's webinar, your plans to purchase or acquire products or services, and this is totally voluntary. So 47% said it increased their intent to purchase. 24% said they were just researching, but now they intend to acquire. 24% also said they were just researching and now they see no need, and 5% decreased. Think of how powerful that is, to be able to understand where someone's decision-making process is and how the webinar inspired them to want to learn more. Again, you attract the audience, the right audience, you engage and deliver on what you promised, and then if you do that right, they'll want to have a conversation with you afterwards. And this is a perfect example. And if you notice on the title there, it says 26% response. That means that 26% of the attendees who opted in to fill this out agreed with that. So that's a pretty important metric there. But let's also talk about some other ways to measure webinar effectiveness. There's about 6 different ways that webinars have an impact on the bottom line. Now obviously, net new deals closed is one of the greatest ways to measure the effectiveness of a webinar, but there's other ways. And one of them is from converting a prospect to a customer. We've done webinars where the attendees were a prospect. They were on the fence, but they were inspired by the webinar, what they learned in the case study, that they saw how that case study could solve a similar problem for them, that they accelerated their interest in dealing with the organization and actually became a customer. So that's a very powerful result of a webinar in its effectiveness. Another way is it's a great way to upsell and cross-sell to your existing base. If you have prospects or you have customers that are attending the webinars, it gives them other ideas for other ways they can do business with you. And as we said in the first poll, it's a great way to get more leads, to increase your sales pipeline. But another thing that it does is, because it's on the internet and because we're cutting across time zones and geographies, it really can put you on the map as a viable player. You can punch up your weight and compete with a lot of large organizations out there if you have something substantive to say. And another area is, if you don't have a large enough sales staff, it can help you reach new markets and new geographies. Where it sounds like you wanted to ask me a question, or I heard you in the background there. Is there something you wanted to chime in on or weigh in on?
No, I just think on that point number 5 of putting you on the map as a viable player, I think we've seen that over and over again, where it really does level the playing field. For smaller organizations that want a bigger piece of the pie. So I just wanted to share that I've seen a lot of success around that.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, as Lori mentioned, we do work for a lot of global brands and emerging brands, and this is probably one of the greatest way for an organization who may not be known outside their region to punch up their weight and get known. So I want to move now to a success story of previous metal casting webinars, and I want to bring Jim back on. Jim, if you can step up to the virtual podium, and I will turn this over to you and have you give the folks a case study on Nopatech, and then we're going to go into some of the other portions of the webinar. Okay?
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. I want to point out that again we chose a case study. This particular one relates to a metal caster who came to us looking for a solution. We've also done these for suppliers to the industry. So again, this does apply equally to both. But the one I've selected today was one for Nopatech, which is a company spun off from a foundry in Quebec, Foundry Saguenay. They came to us looking for some solutions to their very specific set of challenges that they brought to the table for us. So among the challenges that they had with this, now Nopatech was a new process which they had recently patented. It's in the field of it's comparable to rapid prototyping, but for larger castings. Very few people knew about this. The vast majority of people felt that there wasn't even a real good way to do this, so they were really starting from ground zero out in the marketplace. It is a complex process, and as with many metal casting processes, it's when you're starting from the ground up, it requires a thorough explanation. Rapid prototyping and that genre of technology is an extremely fast-moving technology, as many of you probably know, and that is a challenge as well. And then, of course, we had a small sales staff, so you had very little opportunity to get out into the field and lay the groundwork for this. So, of course, this resulted in obviously a lot of potential for growth in terms of open capacity. So we can talk about some of their options as now. They obviously explored several different ways to get this message out. Several tactics with specific results that were explored in this context. Obviously your first order business in any situation like this is you build out a website. Of course, a website serves an important purpose, but it does not drive any leads. In this particular case, they selected the tactic of putting together a presentation to put on at conferences, which worked great. But obviously you have travel involved, there's logistics, and then once you get there, the audiences are too limited. Especially when you have a limited sales staff like they had. And then, of course, we explored print advertising. That's one of the things we do here. And we decided that it was, while advertising is effective, it just wasn't quite fast enough to do what was needed. So with that in mind, we ended up settling on a webinar for this particular customer. The webinar has several satisfies a lot of the things that they needed to do. Obviously, as Mike mentioned earlier, we're capturing only those prospects who either have a pain point or are looking for a solution. So you can just weed out all the people who are just sticking their toes in the water. If they're gonna sit through a 45-minute webinar, then obviously they're very interested for one of these two reasons. Fast turnaround time is pretty obvious. It just resulted in immediate leads that we were able to deliver to this particular customer right after the presentation. So what kind of results did they get, do you say? Well, we went through our process. We promoted it to our entire MCDP audience of end users and buyers throughout a 6-week promotional cycle. We ended up with 57 registrants, 44 attendees. I'll never promise this to anybody, but this was a great fringe benefit. He did have a prospect that was converted to a customer within 6 weeks of the presentation. So a pretty impressive success story in that context. So this should give you a pretty good idea. Again, we've done this for both sides of the coin, as far as for the MCDP audience and for the modern casting audience. Let's bring Mike back in and have him talk a little bit about some actual best practices and things to avoid when you're putting together the webinar.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to do that, but before I do, this example struck me, and it goes back to what I was talking about a little bit ago about effectiveness. It sounds, this is exactly what we were talking about. It converted a prospect into a customer because they were educated and they saw business value in doing business with NOPATEC. Was there anything that you would say was salient about that would be a takeaway that really helped move the needle?
As far as the speed of the conversion time, or
I mean, or was there, because I wasn't part of that webinar, was there anything that you think that was communicated that really helped?
It was an interesting webinar for a lot of reasons. One major concern we had going in was that the presenter is from Quebec. He grew up speaking French and had a pretty strong accent, but was still able to communicate his points very clearly, very concisely. And in this particular case, he benefited a little bit from having presented this particular program before. So he's very familiar with the process. It was very smooth, and he had a finely tuned message that he put forth and to this audience. I think that really helped his results.
Terrific. Thanks, Jim. I know you'll be back in just a moment. Mm-hmm. So as Jim said, let's move to the next section, which are some of our best practices. And I've come up with 10 of them. And Lori and I have seen we've seen 10, we've probably seen 100. So let's start with some of them, because it's important to understand that in producing a webinar, there's a lot of moving parts, and you're managing across a life cycle that involves human factors, logistics, technology, business outcomes. There's just a lot of different things. So we've kind of picked the top 10 blunders to avoid. Probably the number one blunder is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. If you're going to do a webinar, be very clear up front. What are your objectives? What is the audience going to get from attending? And define your success factors. I mentioned that earlier. What is it you're looking for? Are you looking to promote your brand? Are you looking to promote your thought leadership as being different in the industry and bringing better value? Are you looking to get a certain amount of leads? Whatever it is, define them. And then always make sure there's a call to action. I cannot tell you how many times we've worked with clients who have wonderful information, and they get done during our dress rehearsals, and we say, question, what? What's the call to action? Well, what do you mean? What do you want the audience to do? Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. You need to tell the audience what it is to do. It doesn't have to be a hard sell. It could just be, here, so you get more information or whatever. And also, I'm going to show you this in just a moment. One of the beauties of a webinar is that it's an event, but there's an opportunity to gather information before, during, and after. And that's life cycle intelligence. It gives you actionable insights into being better able to serve your audience before they attend and also after they attend. You find out who's really interested. The second blunder really is not making your audience the top priority. This is about your audience, not about you. Why will your audience want to learn what you have to say? What's in it for them? Is it addressing that pain point? Are you showing them how to get better outcomes? If everything you do is around your audience, you'll be fine. Again, I went back to the blunder 3 on the life cycle intelligence. There are 3 distinct phases of a webinar. There's what happens before the event, and that's gathering profile data. Now, all of you that registered, if you remember, we asked one question: what would you like to learn from this webinar? That's very important, because that tells Jim and I and Lori what your interests are and gives us an opportunity to align our presentation and our discussion around your interest. The other is during the webinar, is participating in online polls and live questions and surveys. That gives us good feedback on how well we engage with the audience. And then after the event, there can be the use of surveys. Also, you heard Lori say that a copy of today's webinar is being recorded. Well, that provides a wonderful way to repurpose content after the webinar on a 24/7 on-demand basis. A lot of people who signed up today couldn't make it, but now they'll be given an opportunity to look at it. And we can monitor who's looking at it, and that's fabulous information. Also, it gives us good ideas on the intelligence and how we can nurture the leads, because again, as I said, not everybody is sales ready. Some people need more nurturing, and that's part of it. One of the biggest areas to drive webinar attendance is through email marketing. Now, if you're going to do email marketing, always start 2.5 to 3 weeks before you go live. You need that time to test your messaging. You need that time to track your registration. Probably without a doubt, the most critical line to any email is the subject line. Because think about it. I don't think there's anybody on this call who doesn't get more than their fair share of emails a day. If what's on that subject line doesn't grab you, not only will you not know what the webinar is about, you'll ignore it. So that subject line gets you to open it. And once you open it, you want to make sure that the information in there is salient and important to the audience. Another thing is using daily tracking metrics. You want to measure how many people are coming to your registration landing page, how many people are actually signing up. Those metrics are talked about in great detail in our book, but they give you a predictor on how well you're doing with your messaging. It also tells you what type of attendance you're going to have. Another thing that's good to do is to do subject swaps for each drip or each email blast. You want to come up with something a little bit different, sometimes personalizing it. Like, John, do you know how to educate your advertisers in 2014? And do A/B testing. Come up with different titles and test each of them out and measure them. Very important on email marketing. When it comes to engaging, I mentioned this earlier, there's actually a book called Death by PowerPoint. And it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek look at what not to do when it comes to communicating. But the most important thing is that people want a dialogue. They don't want a monologue. You notice that you have Jim, myself, and Lori. That creates more of a conversation. But probably one of the most important things is to find your speaker's passion to be authentic. You want them to come from something that they really, really believe in, because that's the excitement that's going to light up the audience. If your speakers aren't excited and enthusiastic, how can the audience be? And also, you want to practice flow, and cues, and transitions between the speakers. As I said, this is a very different medium than doing it live in front of people in an in-person event where we can see each other. And the slides must be very, very visually appealing. I'm going to give you an example of that. If you take a look at this slide here, this is an actual slide that a client gave us, and this is what not to do. It's an eye chart. It's got a lot of great information on it, but if you're like most people, you don't know where your eyes should go. Should they be in the top, the bottom? There's just an awful lot of information. So what we recommended is use a lot of white space and use graphics. So we took this slide, and here's what we came up with. Basically, everything that was on that slide at a high level is on this slide. And this makes it very easy to talk about. The other slide, it's about BANT, which is the acronym for Budget, Authority, Need, and Time Frame. But everything I need to talk about is here. There's a lot of white space. And actually, I'll go back one. If you look at the bottom there where I have it with the blue circle around it, this is simply now moved to the center here. And so this gives me some time to breathe and to talk, and it's much easier on your audience. The most significant blunder is not recognizing the importance of a sound check. Sound is the Achilles heel of all webinars, and I'm going to demonstrate that to you. And what you see up there are devices not to use. Do not use speakerphones. Do not use cell phones. Do not use open mics or PCs or Macs. I'm going to demonstrate why. They will do nothing but introduce problems and echo into what you're doing. Now, if you really want to connect with an audience, there's a couple of different ways to do it. If you look at the left, there's a landline. And of course, that's free. And you can go through either the speakerphone or the handset. In the middle is a professional, what we call USB microphone, which is what I'm using. And on the right is a consumer headset. All of these are reasonably priced. The advantages of a USB microphone is that the electronics are better. There's more opportunity to move air through the diaphragm here of the microphone, and it just converts it into a better quality. So what I'd like to do, is just to demonstrate this, is I'm going to move to the next slide. And Lori, I'm going to talk right now through the microphone. So Lori, why don't you go ahead and mute me, and then I'm going to go through the speakerphone and to pick up the handset, and Lori will bring me back to the microphone. You ready, Lori?
Sure. Just right now you're on the USB microphone that's on the right side of the screen. Is that right, Mike?
That's correct.
Okay, so we've got a sense for what that sounds like. I'm going to mute you right now.
Okay, I'm now speaking through a speakerphone. And Lori and Jim, what does this sound like?
It sounds bad.
Yeah, distant, a little distant. I hear some distance introduced between you and the audience.
And that's exactly the point. It creates a barrier. As I said, what's most important is that your voice is the instrument that connects with the audience. This puts a barrier. Now, I'm going to pick up the speakerphone and the handset, and then Lori's going to bring me back. So hold on. Okay, I'm now on the handset. Can you hear me now, Lori and Jim?
Yeah, it's the distance aspect is diminished, but the sound quality is still not very good.
Okay. Well, I'm ready to come back on my professional mic, Lori, so I'll let you move me back over to that. I just hung up the phone. Can you hear me back now, Lori?
Much better, yes. Your sound is back to what it usually is.
Thank you. Number one rule of doing a demo, don't do a demo unless you know it's going to work. So yeah. I'm glad that came out okay. So moving along with sound, and we talk about sound as being extremely important. Another blunder that folks do is that they fail to utilize a professional moderator. And here's where a moderator adds value. A moderator is both in front of the audience with the microphone, but they're also behind the scenes as a trusted coach. They're helping the audience and the presenters become comfortable. Think of them as an orchestra leader. They help keep the flow going. They keep the balance moving. They keep the slides going. They look after the technology. They also have to have the courage to be direct. If the presenter is not speaking loud enough or is not enthusiastic enough or is selling, they need to be able to let them know that too. The eighth blunder, again, is on sound. When I say sound is the Achilles heel, it is. Skipping the final sound check, it can be devastating, because technology has a way of surprising you at the last minute. We had a little fun this morning with Jim not being able to log in, but fortunately we started our sound check an hour before the broadcast, and we were able to get everything fixed. But those are things that happen. Also during the sound check, make sure all the non-essential apps are off. You don't want Outlook invites popping up on your screen. Keep all cell phones off, turn off ringers, even put a do not disturb sign on your door. And then quiet on the set and get ready to go. And another tip that we suggest is print out a hard copy of your PowerPoint slides and do them in the notes page. Just in case you need to follow along if something happens, you've got them. The ninth blunder is not being prepared for the go live. Your audience is your number one priority. We owe you the courtesy to start and end on time. We want to welcome you. It's okay to be enthusiastic and excited, but we're not here to sell. We want to make sure that what we said in the invitation is delivered and we keep our promises and that there's a call to action. And as I always say, this is really about connection, not about perfection. And making mistakes is perfectly fine. The final blunder that a lot of people forget to do is their post-webinar analysis. Good practice is to edit and archive your webinar recording, clean it up so people can listen to it. You want to send thank you emails with the on-demand link or URL, do a final report on the analytics, and did you meet your outcomes? And then begin segmenting your leads. Take the leads that are sales ready and take the leads that need more nurturing. And always follow up unanswered questions and make sure you get back to people. I'm going to bring Jim on, and we're going to talk about the program, and then we're going to take some questions. So what we've put together is a program between metal casting, design and purchasing, and modern casting, and ourselves, and it's a sponsored webinar program. But whether or not you do the webinars yourself, again, as I said, you need to be vigilant about balancing the business drivers, the logistics, the human factors, and the technology. That's a constant juggling act. And to optimize your outcomes, you want to have a methodology, best practices, and metrics to make sure you can navigate along the life cycle to know you're on track. What we've come up with is a complete end-to-end solution for webinar demand creation. And Jim and I are going to talk about this for a moment, and then we're going to get into some questions. But basically, what you need to know is that we will handle everything for you, from helping you define your business objectives, your messaging, help you with the invitation development, make sure that the topic is going to be relevant. We'll work on recruiting the audience, and Jim will talk about that in just a minute. And that's one of the greatest advantages of working with an organization such as Jim's, because they are the trusted advisor to the industry, and they have the greatest credibility. We'll work with you on developing content, on coaching, helping you with your slides, making sure everything is, as we say, webinar ready. We'll go through dress rehearsals, table reads, sound checks. We'll do what we're doing today. We'll go live, and then after the webinar, we'll provide you with a lot of actionable business intelligence and help you really be able to analyze all the information so you understand what you were able to accomplish before, during, and after the webinar. So, Jim, why don't you step in for a second and kind of fill in some of the areas that I didn't cover that the modern casting is going to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, our role in this process is obviously we're the ones who know the industry, and we want to put that knowledge to work for anybody who is going to consider a webinar program reaching out to our audience. You know, we're nowadays we're not really in the magazine business anymore. We're in the audience business, and this, on the slide you can see that Act 2 is recruiting the audience. This is sort of the main our main role in this whole aspect. You know, obviously we contribute to the content as well. The sample I showed earlier was the content development. The development of the presentation was an interactive process between us and the customer pretty much throughout, where we were continually giving what insight we could as far as what's going to resonate the best with that audience, and I think the results speak for themselves. So this it's the kind of thing where both Mike's organization and ours are contributing to each act of the end-to-end solution that you see here.
Yeah, and the thing to keep in mind is, I think as the car commercials say, your mileage will vary. We invite you to give us a call and just have a complimentary consultation, find out if what you're thinking of presenting, how we can maximize your outcomes on that, because there are a variety of factors that go into it, and we can pretty much tell you how that's going to be and what our thoughts are. So, Jim, let me summarize, but I know we got some questions here. Anything else you wanted to add before I summarize?
Well, let's sum it up and see what kind of questions we've got.
All right. So the best way to summarize is we've talked about the effectiveness of webinars and how they work along the life cycle and why they attract people, because it's more than just building it. It's educating them. It's giving them something of value that will help them get better outcomes in their business, or reduce some areas that could be getting to market faster, that could be reducing production cost, whatever it is. The other thing is, it is not just about showing up. There takes a certain amount of effort and focus to create a compelling presentation and engaging the audience. And we will work with you both on the content to make sure that the content is relevant to the audience, and also that the content is such that it's going to come across and connect. And then also, the most important part is realizing that part of the success of a webinar is you're educating your audience. You're not necessarily going to have everybody at the end of it become sales ready, but you're going to help them through the process and be able to come back to them and find out where they are. And if you need to provide more of a consultative approach, you can do that. Those are the things that we wanted to cover, plus the blunders and everything else like that are all part of what makes the webinar work. Lori, I want to turn it back to you, and before we get to the questions, just tell folks how they continue the conversation, and then we got some questions. We're ready to go.
Absolutely. Yeah, folks, on the screen you can see some information there, and there are some great resources on case studies, best practice videos, on-demand webinars that you'll find at webattract.com. On the Modern Casting website, there's information on their offering, and also you got Jim's email address up there. Feel free to reach out to him if you would like to continue the conversation, certainly. Got a number of questions coming in through the questions panel, so we're going to get to those right now. I'd like to ask both Mike and Jim to man your microphones, and I'm going to start with our first question. Let's see. Okay, this is a good one. You didn't mention video. Can you discuss how you see that in use for webinars? Maybe that's a good one for you, Mike.
Sure. I think video is terrific, and there's some great use cases of video coming down to use. The challenge with video is a couple. The bandwidth of the attendee, if they have a strong enough bandwidth to receive a signal without it looking choppy, but there's also how the presenter is lit. Do they have a good location? Are they friendly to the camera? There's just a lot of other things that add into video, but we love it, and we know that it's something we're going to be doing quite soon.
Let me jump in on the video question as well. Again, the sample that I provided, I didn't touch on it as I was going through the case study, but that particular presentation did incorporate video. It's something that has to be managed, but I think in that particular case it worked pretty well. There was one slide with video embedded, demonstrating the process, and there was a prepared speaking over the top of it, which worked pretty well in that particular context. So.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you jumping in there, Jim. And if I don't throw it over to you, please continue to do that. What are the best days and time of the week to offer a webinar?
There are probably, for a B2B audience, the three best days are Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And we have not found a discernible difference between the three, particularly if there is a high interest in the topic. Usually the times that we have now, because you're looking at 4 time zones in North America, typical start time, this is a little earlier than normal, but typically we'll start at 11 a.m. West Coast, noon Mountain, 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. That seems to be the best days and times.
Fantastic. All right. What are the best topics to use for on-demand generation webinars?
Well, I can speak to this a little bit, Mike. I mean, certainly, as most folks know, our industry has a lot of niches within it. There's a lot of very specific sort of topics that can be addressed. Typically, we recommend starting it with a dialogue with us. Ask us if you don't have a topic in mind going in. Ask. We develop content for this industry, and we try and do it in a timely fashion. As a result, we feel like we have a pretty good feel for what the hot button issues are in the industry, and there could be some possibilities that spring up as a result of that, or possibly some ability to fine-tune a topic that you already have. I'm sure Mike has more to say about topics as well.
Yeah, I think the topics, again, go back to something that's timely, relevant, that has something that will help someone in the industry become more informed and more educated. I mean, that's really what it gets down to. There's case studies, tutorials, things about compliance. And this actually, I see a question in there, I'm going to jump on it. This actually, for international coverage, Paul, I see your question in there. Thank you for that. One of the nice things about the webinar, because it's virtual, it cuts across geographies and time zones. And so we will often find that in some of the webinars, we will get people from 60 different countries signing up. Now, usually outside of the 4 time zones that I mentioned in North America, if they can attend, they get a link to the on-demand recording, and they use that opportunity to watch it on their own. So this is a great way for covering the global landscape. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, this one from Jen. She's asking, how do you determine the targeted audience to send the email marketing?
Well, I can take that as a first, and I'll let Jim fine-tune it. The way you determine your target audience is, what is the message or value proposition that you want to communicate? Is this for executives? Is it for operations? Is it for marketing? Who is best going to find relevance or value in that? And then you identify by either size of organization, what particular industries, what job titles, what job functions, is there a revenue size to the company, number of employees, things like that are used to be able to determine your demographic. Jim, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of options. Really, most of it has to be driven, most of it has to be driven by you and what you've seen through your sales process and what sort of profile you have of the customer for the program that you're presenting on. But that said, once you sort of have a pretty good idea of that, within the context of our industry, we have the ability to target according to some parameters that are specific to our industry. For example, all of the metal casters are segmented out by the processes that they use and the metals that they pour. That's a very basic sort of segmenting that we can do to our list in terms of determining who we're going to approach.
All right, perfect, thank you. I got one here, another one from Paul. What percentage of the audience uses up-to-date browsers to access the event, and what percentage have IT challenges viewing webinars?
The browsers that are most commonly used would be Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Chrome. As far as what percentage have challenges, if an organization has put an inability to, or they block out a particular IP, that can cause a problem. But I would say, Paul, it's a handful. We have had anywhere from a couple hundred people, 100 people. We've had up to 1,000 people on a webinar, and proportionally there will be a handful of people that do have challenges, but we always have somebody, a logistics producer, who's standing by to help walk them through. It's not as common as you would think, and the technology's gotten a lot better.
All right, this one from Sarah. How much on-air time is really available for a webinar?
Well, if you look at the standard webinar of being an hour, you probably have about 35 to 40 minutes of on-air time. That includes introductions, but if you and polls, and you want to leave some questions, time for questions, as we did today. So for actual content, Lori and Sarah, that's about 35 minutes.
All right. It looks like we're getting up to the top of the hour. I wanted to give both of our panelists, Jim and Mike, a chance to give us some closing comments. I'll start with you, Jim. Anything that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I'm pleased to see that this many folks have gotten on board with the webinar idea. It's not a new idea, but relative to our industry, it's somewhat new. It still has a newness to it, which I think it has some potential to attract some people, and also the ability to segment out and really drill down with people and determine what their interests are. It can be a tremendously valuable tool.
All right, thank you. And then over to you, Mike.
Well, I would just say that we would highly encourage you to look at using webinars as one of your tactics in achieving more leads, in promoting your brand, promoting your thought leadership, and would love to have the opportunity to chat with you. They're a lot of fun. They're a lot of work, no second guessing that, but they can be extremely effective when done right. And I just really want to thank you, Jim, and the audience for joining us today. And Lori, I'll turn it over to you to give the final messages.
Okay, yeah, we are just about at that time, and folks, I also would like to thank each of you for joining today and hope you found today's webinar of value and you'll want to join us for some future events. As I mentioned, you'll be receiving a short survey at the end of the webinar, and if you can take a moment to fill it out, we certainly would appreciate it. For any questions, and we do have several in the queue that we could not answer on air today, we'll certainly be getting back to you over the next tomorrow or early next week. You'll also get that link to the on-demand viewing via email early next week as well. Special thanks to Jim Beckwith of MCDP and for making today possible. Again, as your moderator, this is Lori Dearman saying thanks and have a great rest of the week. Bye for now.